All right, everybody. So welcome to our event today. My name is Krista Danis. I'm the events and program coordinator at the Aurora Public Library. This is our Cape Con event, drawing and comic making with author and illustrator Jarrett Lerner. Before the introduction, I do want to point out that we are recording this session. It's in speaker view, so it will be available on our YouTube channel for later viewing, so that's good. Also, I'm going to make sure to mute everyone once we get started, just to kind of decrease sound interference throughout the program. But if you have a question about anything throughout, you can pop it in the chat, and we're going to keep our eyes on it. So we'll see it there. And there's also going to be time for some Q&A at the end. So it's my pleasure to introduce our amazing speaker today. Jarrett Lerner is the author of Engine Nerds and its sequel, Revenge of the Engine Nerds, as well as the author-illustrator of the forthcoming activity book. Give this book a title, Over 100 Activities to Kickstart Your Creativity. Jarrett's also the author of the forthcoming Giger the Robot early chapter book series, the forthcoming third book in the Engine Nerds series, The Engine Nerds Strike Back, and the author-illustrator of the forthcoming Hunger Heroes graphic novel series. He co-founded and helps run the MG Book Village, an online hub for all things middle grade, and is the co-organizer of the hashtag Kids Need Books and hashtag Kids Need Mentors projects. He can be found at jarrettlerner.com and on Twitter and Instagram at hashtag Jarrett_Lerner. I'll put those in the chat in a moment. And he lives in Medford, Massachusetts, like we just talked about, with his wife, his daughter, and a cat. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Jarrett Lerner.
Thank you guys so much for having me. This is super fun. I've been bummed out that I haven't got to spend as much time in schools and libraries, hanging out with kids, drawing, creating, learning from you and teaching you and all that good stuff. So I'm excited to be doing this tonight. Thank you for inviting me. Just briefly, I wanted to give you a peek at some of my books so that you can attach the names to book covers. So I'll show you. Here's my first book called Engine Nerds. This is my first series, and it's the only series out right now. But later this year, I have 2 more series of books launching, and next year I have a 4th series of books launching. But this is the one that you can get your hands on. It's called Engine Nerds. It's about a group of kids who like to build things and take things apart. And one day, a bunch of robots show up at their houses. And the robots eat all the food in their houses and then digest it. They press it down into their stomachs, into these little tiny cubes. And then you guys look like a smart bunch. I'm sure you know what happens next. What does happen next to food when you eat it and then digest it? The robots start farting the food back out at the kids. And it gets crazy and things get wild. And if you end up reading that book and liking it, there's a second one, Revenge of the Engine Nerds. There's a third one coming, The Engine Nerds Strike Back. And here's my other series, which isn't even a book yet. It doesn't come out for another couple months. But this is just a copy of the jacket. But this is Giger the Robot. It's about a totally different robot who lives in this town and works in his house. And every day he sees kids walking past his window back and forth. Every day they're laughing and smiling, and they're always on their way to school or coming home from school. And they always look happy. So he reasons that school must be the greatest place on earth if all these kids are so happy to go there. Right? So Giger decides to enroll in school, but he doesn't know the first thing about school. He doesn't know what recess is or what you're supposed to do in a cafeteria or how to line up or how to raise your hand. So he makes a lot of mistakes and it gets pretty silly. The last thing I want to tell you about, which your librarian said she was going to throw into the chat, is my website, jarrettlerner.com. You can learn more about my books there, but also, even cooler, you can get all sorts of free activity sheets. I make these activity sheets almost every day and I post them so you guys can check them out. So for instance, here's a how to draw a cat activity sheet. You can download this for free. I've also got stuff like this. All these trees where you have to give them names and decide what they're saying. And then I've got all of these things that you comic-loving kids might especially like. All of these finish this comic sheets. So here, for instance, is a comic about a blowfish who pops. And then you have to fill in the blanks and decide what happens next. Here's another one with a shark, and you have to decide what happens next. So if you guys want some more writing and drawing activities to keep you busy, you can head to my website and check those out. There's 100 something at least, I think, there. And I've got a couple of activity books coming out soon with hundreds of more. So what I'm here to mostly do with you guys, instead of talk about myself, is show you guys some cool things about drawing and making comics. I asked before if you guys like drawing and making comics, and you all said yes. So I'm gonna give you some pointers, some tips, and open things up to discussion so that you guys can ask me questions about making comics and drawing. And you can ask any, I'm gonna leave time at the end for you guys to like unmute and ask me questions if you want about anything at all. But if you have questions about the stuff that I'm doing as I'm doing it, put them into the chat, and I'm gonna keep an eye on that. And I'll do my best to answer them or clarify or explain as I go along. So feel free to use that chat feature. I see someone, who is it? Lucas has got a cat in his screen. If you guys see a cat in my screen, don't be alarmed. That's just my cat. She sometimes appears during my Skype visits. So if you see a cat ear, it's not Lucas's cat going to my computer. It's my own cat. All right. So the first thing I want to talk to you guys about is just drawing. Before we even get into comics, I just want to talk about some drawing basics. Now, there is no right or wrong way to draw. There is no right or wrong way to create, to do anything. You can draw a cat one way, I can draw a cat another way, and one isn't, you know, better or worse. They're just different ways of doing the same thing. The goal of drawing is to communicate an idea instantaneously, so that you draw something and then you show it to someone, and right away, boom, they just think, I know what that is. I can tell that that's this or that. Drawing is so cool to me for a lot of reasons. It's one of the most fun things I can ever imagine doing. I love doing it just for fun. It's a blast. But also, it's the most universal and fundamental language we have. I'm going to show you what I mean by that. If you're traveling to a different country, let's say you're in you know, some random country and you don't speak the language, but you're in need of something. If you don't speak the language and you need help, you can't communicate with anyone. But let's say you're in this foreign country traveling, and let's say you open your suitcase one morning and you discover that you haven't packed enough pairs of underwear. You've got no more underwear left. You're in trouble, right? You need help. Now, if you can't speak the language, you're not getting any underwear. But if you know how to draw, if you know how to express yourself visually, you can draw a quick pair of underwear, right? And say, hey, I need this. You can point and show and say, I need this. Even better, you might draw a little underwear store. And maybe if you show this to someone and gesture enough, they'll say, all right, this guy needs an underwear store pronto. I'm going to show him where to get it. So that's what's amazing about drawing and about visual communication, is it transcends every other language. So if someone came to your town, if someone showed up in Aurora and drew this picture and said, after a while, after long enough, you would say, I think this person needs to go buy some underwear. And you could help them get to the underwear store, right? So that's what's amazing about visual communication. So I want to show you some tips about drawing, and you might have noticed some of them if you're really sharp-eyed and you've already got a great visual mind. You might have noticed some things. But a lot of times, and also I should say, what I'm using to draw are some very basic, just Bic pens and a very basic ink marker. These are like the cheapest tools. You can use anything. I see some pencils. I saw some Crayola markers earlier. It doesn't matter what you use. I'm also using recycled paper, the back of recycled paper. So this is a novel of mine that I was revising. You can use anything to create. Now, what I want to show you is how I approach this blank page. When I'm coming to a page, when I want to draw something, this page right here, this blank sheet of paper can sometimes be intimidating, right? It can sometimes be scary. You can say, I want to draw, let's say I draw a lot of robots for my book. So let's say I want to draw a robot. It can be really intimidating to say, I want to draw a robot, and then look at this blank paper. You can't figure out where to start, how to start, what to do. It's very, very confusing. So what you learn after illustrating and drawing enough is you learn to break things down into steps. So if my goal is to draw a robot on this piece of paper, instead of trying to go from A to Z, instead of trying to leap from blank paper to finished drawing of a robot, I make steps for myself. A lot of very easy steps. It's like those drawings you might have done in the past where there's all the dots and they're numbered, and you connect to the numbered dots and then you have a drawing at the end. It's sort of like the same idea, but you do it using steps that you make up along the way and using the most basic thing of all to draw, which is just shapes. So a lot of times when I do this, I ask people to raise their hand and I say, who thinks they can draw a robot right now? And a lot of times, especially when I do it with adults are like, I don't think I can't draw a robot. But if you break things down, I'm going to show you how it becomes much easier. So maybe you don't think you can draw a robot, but you can probably think in your head, what shape would a robot's head be? Let's just take the robot out of the equation, just a robot head, just the head. What shape might it be? If anyone has any ideas, you can put it into the chat. Otherwise, after a second, I'll just draw what kids normally say to me when I do this activity with them. So a robot's head. It looks like maybe someone's typing, so I'll give you a second. And remember, I'll reiterate, there's no right or wrong answer. You can draw a robot head in any shape you want. I'm just looking for one idea. You can draw a robot in a billion ways. The goal of drawing is to effectively communicate an idea to someone. So, okay, so someone said a hexagon or a septagon. So it can be any sort of, I'm gonna go with something even easier just to start. I'm gonna go with like a square or a rectangle. So pretty much anyone can draw a square or a rectangle. I have a 3-year-old daughter, and she can it's a little rough, but she can nearly just about draw a rectangle. And I'm guessing any of you guys can draw a rectangle. Now, what about the robot's body? What about their torso? What shape might that be? It looks like Meyer already drew an awesome robot. Well, I'm going to go off of what you did. I'm going to use another rectangle shape for the robot's torso. Now, what about the robot's limbs? Some more rectangles, but they should probably be thinner. They should probably be thin and long. But all I've done here is draw a bunch of rectangles. Now, eyes. I can do a couple more squares. Can do a couple more, a rectangle for the mouth. I can do, for the body, if I want to add some details, I can add another rectangle with a whole bunch of lines. And then I can do some coloring in. Maybe add some lines on the arms. Okay. So all I did there was draw a whole bunch of rectangles and lines, but I got to a robot somewhat. Looking at this, do you guys feel like this effectively communicates robot? Like when you see this, do you think robot? Nice, pretty good. Yeah, and Meyer's holding his up. That looks like a robot. That meets the criteria. If my goal of a drawing is to communicate the idea of what I'm trying to draw right away to the person looking at it, you see a robot when you see this. That means I've done my job. But I might not be satisfied with this robot. I might want my robot to look differently for whatever project I'm drawing. So here's the other technique that I use. So as an illustrator, the first thing I do is I break things down into steps using basic shapes. Now I'm going to show you the next technique I do, which is if I'm not satisfied with this drawing, if this doesn't quite meet the vision that I have in my mind, instead of being embarrassed, instead of throwing it out and starting over from scratch, instead of hiding this away or tearing it up or anything, I look hard and long. I study this first drawing really hard, and I say, what can I do to make this drawing more like the image I have in my head of a robot? So if you have any ideas, you can throw them into the chat. Otherwise, I'm just gonna throw some out myself. When I draw robots, for instance, I usually like them to have more personality and be able to get more empathy out of the viewer. So I think if I make the eyes more round and give pupils, that might work. And maybe if I give a smile, maybe I should add some more robotic features to the head, like a light bulb or antennae, depending what I want to do, or some screws. Maybe I want to add even more buttons of different shapes and sizes. Maybe I want to try to add like a little screen, like a computer screen. Maybe I want to make sure it has arms, hands, and feet. Maybe in my story or in my comic that I'm making with the robot has to grab something. So maybe I'll give him some hands. So here's like a couple wrench-like hands. Maybe the feet are just like trapezoids like that. So what I'll do is I'll look long and hard at this, and I'll take notes, and I'll do sketches in the corner of my sketch pad. And then I'll go to a clean sheet of paper, and I'll try again. And I'll look at my first drawing, and I'll try to remind myself throughout. I'll say, what did I want to change in my second drawing to make this more like my robot that I want here? So here's drawing 1, and here I'm going to attempt drawing 2. So I'll stick with my head. I'm going to make the eyes round because I think that gets a little bit more emotion out. I'm going to give it some curves. So robots are usually made out of all, synthetic, manufactured right angles. But humans are more organic. So the more curves you add, the more emotion you can find in that. This robot is emotionless, but now you can see some emotion now that I've added some of those curves. So here's the torso. I'm going to keep that first panel of buttons that are just lines and rectangles, but maybe I'll add some circles, and maybe I'll add in a little screen. I'm going to keep my arms and legs. Add the lines for details. But remember, I'm going to give it some hands now, because in the story I'm writing, maybe I want it to be able to pick things up. And let's give it a light bulb. And why not also give an antennae and some screws? You can also add some screws on it, on its head, on its torso, added details. You can always just add some little lines for texture. This is just me playing around. So there. Now maybe I look at that and say, okay, there, my second drawing is closer to what I want, but it's still not quite there. Maybe there's more things I want to change. So I go through the process again. Maybe I say, I want the screen to be the biggest thing of all and just a couple of buttons. Maybe I say, I want the hands to be more like claws and more scary. Maybe it's a scary robot, so I want some like claw hands. And maybe if it's a scary robot, I want to give it a frown instead of a smile, and maybe give it some fangs. So you can keep going like this. And when I'm working on an illustration for a book or for my graphic novel, it never takes me one try. It rarely takes me 2 tries. It typically takes me dozens, if not hundreds of tries to get one of my illustrations just right. So what that means for you guys is when you're sitting down drawing, if your first attempt does not match the vision you have in your head, if it doesn't do what you want it to do, that's not an indication that you can't do it. That doesn't mean you're bad at drawing. That doesn't mean you're never going to do it how you want it, how you're envisioning it. It just means you have to keep going. It means you have to look hard at what you figure out exactly what you don't love about this and figure out how to make it there in this. And you have to keep going. Whether it's 2 times, whether it's 200 times, whether it's 2,000 times. I've been telling this story a lot when I've been doing these virtual visits because I was recently working on a graphic novel in which I had to draw a vacuum cleaner. And I had never drawn a vacuum cleaner before. And this is what my first vacuum cleaner looked like. It was sort of like this. Does that look like a vacuum cleaner? Definitely not. But after going over and over and over again and again, after looking at it and analyzing, after pulling out the vacuum cleaner out of my closet, after looking at other people's drawings of vacuum cleaners, I finally started, after literally hours, I finally started to get closer to a vacuum cleaner. And it's a really mean vacuum cleaner. I finally started to be able to draw a vacuum cleaner. But this literally took me hours to figure out. And it's still not even quite there. I still need to work on it some more. But this is what it's like to be an illustrator. Being a professional illustrator doesn't mean that you can draw everything you want to draw first try. It means you know how to start simple and break things down into shapes like this. And it means that you can revise, that you can look at this and figure out in your head how to turn it into something closer to what you want it to be. Does that make sense? At this point, does anyone have any questions about that? No? Cool. So let's talk about comics. Let's talk about making comics. Comics are stories, and they're the most basic stories. A comic can be just one drawing. It can be 2 drawings, or it can be 3, 4, 5, 6, 700. It can fill a page, a whole 500 pages of a graphic novel. It can be a ton of different drawings. But I'm going to talk to you guys a bit about the most basic kind of comic, which is just sort of a 2-panel comic. And I want to talk to you a bit about what this is, because this looks like a really basic thing. When you guys see this and you see drawings in it, you know that you're looking at a comic, and it seems really simple, but there's actually a lot of complicated things going on here. So first of all, does anyone know what these boxes are typically called? I see some typing. So again, there's no like right or wrong word for it, but there are terms that people use in the industry and with each other so that it makes sense. Like when I'm talking to my art director or other people about them. Chris said close. Chris said comic planes. I think you just got a couple letters mixed up. Maybe you got auto corrected there. But these are called, you got all the letters in there. These are called panels.
Comic panels.
Yeah, that's what you meant. I figured. Also, I hope you guys know all this drawing and writing I'm doing is upside down. So if letters are backwards or it looks weird, it's because I'm doing it upside down. I've gotten pretty good at it though. So these are panels. So this is a 2-panel comic. Now, panels are moments in time. I like to think of it as like a picture. Like you take a picture and it captures a moment in time. So when you put 2 panels together, it creates this other thing. Does anyone know what this thing is called? The blank space between panels. That's okay. This is why we're doing this, so I can tell you this. This thing right here, you also have these things on your houses, funnily enough, on your roofs. This is called a gutter. You might have heard of a rain gutter, which collects the rain and gets it off of, pumps all the water once it goes off of your roof into one place. This is called a gutter. It's the same sort of thing. It's this typically blank space between 2 panels. Now, nothing happens. You don't see anything in between these two. In this space is normally left blank, but it's very important. And there's a lot of creativeness and artfulness that goes into figuring out what these gutters do. Let me show you what I mean. A gutter constitutes, what it is it's time. It's time passing. And the amount of time that passes in this gutter is totally up to you, the comic creator. So let me show you what I mean. So here's some panels. And by the way, panels are often square or rectangular, but they don't have to be. They can be circular. They can be semicircular. They can be any shape that you can draw. They can be star shaped. It doesn't matter. You can make a panel any shape you want. Usually the panel has to do with what's going on in the story sometimes if it's a weird shape, but it can just be an exciting shape. So, all right. So I'm going to set up this very basic comic. So does anyone have any idea? Do you guys get a sense for how much time is passing between these panels? You can
A lot,
right? The sun is rising.
An hour?
Well, maybe a little bit more than an hour, but you're in the right, you're in the right area. It's a few hours. Like the sun is here, it's just getting up to the ocean. Now it's high. It's like a noon time, and now it's setting again. It's like evening. So what about something like this? What about something like that? How much time is passing there? More than a couple hours?
No, like
Like
50, like
Years,
5
yeah.
years.
Yeah, probably even more than 5 years. All right, let's do one more. What about something like this? Does anyone have any guesses about how much time is passing there? Yeah, you can go ahead and say something or type it in.
minutes.
Oh, like 5 minutes. I don't know.
5 minutes? Yeah, so see, you guys see how this is a little bit trickier, and it really tells a lot about the viewer, because this could be 5 minutes. It could be 1 second. Maybe someone's really sad and then they have a happy thought and they get happy. Maybe someone's really sad and they see a butterfly and it makes them happy. Or maybe someone is sad for a whole day and then the next day they wake up happy. So there is not much to tell you about how much time has passed. And you can see how when there's less information given, the viewer, the reader's imagination has a lot more input and has a lot more space to play around. So these gutters aren't giving you much, freedom for your own imagination to play around. This is giving you a good sense of the amount of time, and this isn't. So that's just hopefully to show you what a gutter can do and how the gutter can be used to make the reader do less or more work, and also how it signifies time passing. The passing can be an hour, it can be years, or it can be a couple seconds or a minute. Often in graphic novels, especially if it's an action scene, like if it's a fight scene or like, a chase scene, from one panel to the next, it might be split seconds. It's really fast. And then if it's a slower scene about like someone's whole day and what they're doing through a whole day, it might be much more slow. Now I want to use this last last 2 panels to show you a little exercise I sometimes use when I'm drawing comics and trying to figure out what to draw and trying to figure out how to tell a story in comics. So I'm going to take just these 2 panels. I'm going to redraw them up here. So here's our little character looking sad. And here he is, or she, I guess you can't really you don't know if it's a he or she, looking happy. So often what I'll do when I'm drawing comics and just trying to think about what to draw and what kind of story I want to tell, I'll draw a quick 2-panel comic like this. And all I want to do at first is just make sure there's some sort of change. So in these you saw the sun rising and falling, and that's when you saw a tree growing. And in this you see someone going from sad to happy. So from panel to panel, you want to see a change, whether it's just someone who wasn't talking before talking, whether it's someone who was in one place at one point going to a different place, whether it's someone feeling a different emotion, whether it's someone doing a different action. You have to have some sort of change. If you don't, if I drew a comic and it was just this same panel over and over again, that might be an interesting page of a comic. It would just show you that this person was sad for a really long time. You could even do something like, I'll make this much simpler just so we don't spend too much time. But if you just did a smiley face and it was pretend this is your character. You could have, you know, behind them, let's say they're a stick figure. Behind them, you could have the sun coming up and getting higher and higher and sinking and sinking. So you could have a panel without much change besides, you know, that just tells you this person was sad all day long, right? But now if we go back to this, here's the exercise and the little game I like to play with myself. I say, okay, here's a change that happened. This character was sad and now they're happy. What happened in here? And rather than letting the reader necessarily make up all the details, I will add another panel in between here. And I'll say, okay, what might have made this character so happy? Let's say
A toy.
a toy. Sure, that's a great idea. There's no right or wrong answer or idea. Everyone's going to come up with something different. I just came up with ice cream. So maybe he gets an ice cream cone. Yay, happy ice cream cone. That could be a comic right there. Character is sad, character gets an ice cream cone, character is happy. Yay, that's awesome. Now, I can keep that comic going by adding before, or I can add some panels after. So let's say I want to add a couple panels after. So remember, I need to create change. So let's say my character is sad, they get an ice cream cone, and then they're happy. And then something needs to happen to change this situation. So what if I go like this? A little whoosh. And then, let's see if I can draw this upside down. So here we've got a bird stole the ice cream from the kid. And you can keep on going. You can add more. So this is, and then, you know, you can have the kid in the last panel be sad all over again. So we went from sad to happy to sad. That shows that's a whole story. A kid is sad, but he gets ice cream and he's happy, but a bird steals it and he's sad again. The end. That's a funny comic that we just sort of came up with on the spot, just from starting with a moment of change and keeping that idea going.
Really?
So that's a game I play with myself to sort of get ideas for comics and to make sure they have all the things that comics should have in them, which is like little moments of transition and change and action, things happening. So you can write comics, you can practice writing comics of your own out of sequence like this. And remember, you can stop here with just 2 panels. It can just be a story about someone feeling happy or sad and then happy, or happy and then sad. But if you can add a third, you can add a fourth and a fifth and a sixth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can keep on going and going and going and going. One other thing I want to mention before we I open it up to like questions from you guys more in general, is that comics are often thought of as a medium to write fiction, but comics are often in the world around you used in nonfiction informational purposes. So for instance, do you guys, I know you probably haven't been on an airplane in a while now, but if you've been on an airplane in your life, do you know the safety instructions on the seat back in front of you that tell you how to use, you know, your seat belts and how to put down your tray table? All of those are comics, right? They're one drawing that shows change from drawing to drawing to drawing to drawing, showing you where to find your seatbelt and where to put it in. So you guys can use comics for all sorts of non-fictional purposes. I know a lot of kids and a lot of adults, professional authors and illustrators and comic creator friends of mine who draw their diaries in comics. So they say, this happened to me, and they'll make comics. They'll say, I woke up and I was feeling kind of sad. And then I got ice cream and I was feeling happy. But then a bird stole my ice cream and I was sad again. That was my day. So you can do that. You can also draw tutorials. Like, and what's great about this is it loops back around to with this being sort of like a universal language. Is let's say you invent your own kind of sandwich or snack. You can draw a tutorial to teach people how to make that snack, or how to make the perfect peanut butter and jelly sandwich. You can draw it in comics. If you want to ask your mom or dad or your guardian to take you somewhere, you want to write about how you want the next day to go. You could draw comics of that, right? You can communicate in any way with drawings, with comics, instead of with words. And it'll often be a more universal application of it. One last thing I want to show you is, if you're drawing comics, is if you don't feel like going through the whole process of trying to, say, draw a robot and revising it over and over and over, you don't need to draw very complicated characters in order to make comics, right? You guys can all, write words if it's a comic with words in it, with speech balloons and bubbles. But to create your own characters, all you need is to know dots and lines and shapes. So there's actually, I mentioned my website before, and it's in the chat up top. If you go to my website and look at the activities page, there's an activity called the Character Creator, and it will help you create characters of your own. But I'll show you. If you want to start making comics and you don't want to go through the process of designing a character, just make some shapes. And then you can use simple dots and lines. So here's the guy. And then if you want to get more adventurous, you can get more adventurous. But these are all the most basic sort of shapes possible. And there's no right or wrong. And the more you do this, the more fluent you'll get at it. And the more you do stuff basically, and the better you get at these basic shapes, you'll be able to start making some, different shapes.
Avocados.
Yeah. So here's an avocado with a hat. My graphic novel that's coming out is all about food ingredients. So I draw a lot of food. But an avocado is just, like a circle and another half circle on top of it. But you don't need to be able to do much, You could make the ice cream comic with this guy, with a little circle. All an ice cream cone is a triangle and a little half circle and some lines. And on my website, like I said, there's all sorts of how to draw things. So you can, if you don't know how to draw ice cream and you don't feel like breaking it down into shapes like we talked about, you can sometimes find out just by looking it up. And often, make sure you have your parents' permission first, obviously, to use the internet and the computer. But a lot of times what I do is I just go on to like Google image search, and I say, drawing of ice cream or drawing of hamburger. And I'll look at someone else's drawing and say, what shapes did they use? And I'll figure out how someone else drew a hamburger, and if it's maybe the way I want to draw it. And a great thing to do is, if you're learning how to draw, is copy all the different ways that other people make one thing and do it. Last thing I want to show you guys is you can often just pick a shape, a single shape. I do this all the time, like almost every day, just to get warmed up. I'll pick a single shape and try to figure out how many different things I can make out of it. So does anyone look at this shape? Do you see anything in this shape? When you look at this little U shape, does anything like jump out at you? Like, that's the shape of a... Anyone have any ideas?
Avocados.
Maybe an avocado.
Avocados.
A row of seats, yeah. That's great. So if you put them all together, it's like a row of seats. But if you think of them individually, like, look at this, ready? If you think of them individually, let's just see how many things we can make. We can make a rainbow. And put some clouds down here. We can make a little hill with a flower. We can make a jellyfish. We can make a ghost. If it's floating, we can make a turtle.
Ooh, you can make a
Yeah, what?
what was it? You could make a tombstone.
A tombstone? I've never had that one before. Look at that. A tombstone. Maybe you're writing a horror movie or drawing a comic, or writing a horror story, or drawing a comic with a horror vibe in it. Does anyone else see anything? What about a frog?
What about a half sun?
Crab.
Yeah.
Or
A half sun?
crab, whatever said.
Here's a half sun.
That one's funny.
A door.
Someone said a crab. Let's see. Crabs should be crabby, right?
Yeah, there's so many ways you can draw stuff with these half circles.
Yeah, so I love using this shape, but you can use any shape. You can do a regular ways U. You can use any sort of shape. But this is a really cool way just to get your imagination going. And like I said, there's no right or wrong way to do anything. So, you know, you can draw these things any way you want. So here's a little chicken. Yeah, any number of things. I'm sure there's plenty more. If you give this thing big enough ears.
A door. A door.
A bunny. A door? Yeah. Cool. Yeah, so see, and you can do this with any shape you want. You can do it with a circle, with a square, with a rectangle, with a diamond, with any shape. And sometimes another thing I'll do is I'll pick one character, like pick a chicken, and say, how many different shapes can I use to draw a chicken? So, you know, I can do this. Can I do it like this? How would I turn this into a chicken? Maybe I'll go like this. Can I turn a circle into a chicken? What about it? You can even do a square chicken, a robot chicken. So these are a couple things that I do to really sort of keep myself sharp when it comes to drawing and try to get better and better and better. So what I've given you guys is all the tools and techniques that I use as a professional illustrator. That's it. There's no fancy secrets or shortcuts or anything like that. That's what I use every day to do what I do, to make books and drawings and comics. So if you guys have any questions for me about any of that or about anything else, I'm happy to try to answer them to the best of my ability. Since there's not tons of us, and I don't think the sound will be interfering, you can ask, you know, out loud, or if you'd rather type it, you can type it. But does anyone have any questions?
How would one try to get over writer's block? Like if you're writing something and then you're like stuck on something.
Yeah, great. So writer's block, so there's a few things you can do. One thing that I do is often when you're stuck and you're running up against a problem, you know, you think the best thing to do is to sit there and focus on it and try to do something. But often the best thing to do is to take a step back. Sometimes when I'm frustrated and hammering my head against a problem, I'll get up, I'll finally give up and just be like, I'm done for the day. You know, I'm done. I can't even deal with that. And often before I even make it out of the room, something occurs to me. So often you just need to get your mind off of it. Sometimes it's like an hour, a minute, sometimes it's a day, sometimes it's a week. But your imagination, your brain, it just might need some space to really sort of pour over what problem you're dealing with. Not all problems when it comes to writing and stories can be solved instantaneously. So you might need like a few hours or a day or even a week or longer to really let it sort of get wrapped around your head and let your imagination find an answer. So that's one thing. Another thing I often do is, if you guys can see behind me, I have a lot of books. So often I'll grab a book that I love, or a book that I know does something that I'm trying to do really well. So if I'm writing a scene that's supposed to be really funny or really action-packed and I can't figure out how to do it, I'll go grab a book that I know does that and I'll read it and try to find either information or inspiration in the pages to figure out how to do it. The third thing I would recommend is have someone else that you trust, whose opinion you trust and who you know cares about what you're up to, cares about your writing and wants you to succeed and get better. Find someone like that and have them help you. Either talk it through with them or have them read it and say, I don't know what to do next, or how do I get around this? I was working on my third book in the Engineered series recently, and I couldn't figure out this last little bit in the end. And my wife could tell that I was really frustrated. And she said, why don't you just say it out loud? And so I talked it through out loud. And by the time I got to the problem, she knew what to do. She said, oh, you should just have them do this. Aren't they going to do that? And I said, what do you mean? She said, that's what I thought you were going to say. It makes sense that they would do that. And I said, obviously that's the answer, but I couldn't see it. I was too close. I was staring at it too close and I couldn't pull back. So take a break, look for inspiration in other writing, and seek outside help. Those are probably the 3 best things you can do.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. Anyone else have any questions?
This isn't really a question, but
Okay.
normally when I'm drawing something and writing it, it's not making a story. It's not what to say or draw, what to write. It's what not to write or to
Yeah,
draw.
that's really important, and that reminds me of a thing I often quote, which is there's a famous jazz musician, Miles Davis. He played the trumpet. If you don't know him, I'm sure your parents know of him, but he used to say that the notes he played on his trumpet, the only reason they were there was to carve out the silences. He said that the silence in the music, the times that he wasn't playing his trumpet, were more important than the notes he was playing. So the times that you didn't hear anything of his trumpet were more meaningful and powerful than the times you did hear him. And I think that's true for writing and drawing too. And here's why. It's just like what I showed you with the gutter, how I showed you when you leave that gutter, that space, it allows the viewer's head and their own imagination to fill in the blank, to figure out what's going on. That's what it's like in writing as well as viewing. When you're viewing comic panels, is what you leave out is really important because that invites the reader to fill it in. So when I'm writing a story, for example, I don't necessarily tell you, I don't say the character woke up and then he swung his legs out of bed and stood up on his 2 feet and took 4 steps to the dresser and then pulled open the top drawer and got a pair of socks and put on his left sock and then put on his, I don't say all that. I leave that out. That's a very obvious example, but the things that you leave out are what invite the reader in. So let's say a better example might be, let's say you have a character wake up and they go and they open their window and look outside and they see that it's a sunny day and they get angry. Most people, when they see a sunny day, are happy. Typically, you'd expect someone who you randomly don't know to be happy at a sunny day. But this person gets mad at a sunny day. But you not telling us why, it leaves a little bit of mystery and it makes the reader wonder what's going on. It makes them curious to continue reading, to find out. So what you said there was incredibly wise and important and smart, that it's just important as what you leave out as what you put in. So the art of writing and of drawing and of making comics is putting in all you need to give the readers enough information to make them feel grounded and like they know where they are and who they're dealing with, but to also leave enough mystery so that they're curious to keep on reading, to keep on turning those pages. Yeah, that's a great comment. Does anyone else have questions or comments or anything?
I have a question.
Okay.
What do you do when you get like frustrated?
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thanks for hanging out today. Great drawing.
Yeah. I spent a lot of time in my art class at school.
Well, I
And
hope.
I really like doing it. That's my favorite subject.
Oh, well,
art class.
I hope this satisfied some of your missing your art class needs. Thanks for joining me and keep drawing. Some really good.
Thanks.
Drawing.
Bye.
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 What do I do? Are you going too?
Yes, bye.
Bye.
Yes, bye.
For joining me. Have a good night. Awesome drawings. Those are great. Keep up the great work. Thank you for joining me. Okay, so what do I do when I get frustrated? Well, there's a lot of things I do. Sometimes I do just the sort of stuff that I just answered. Sometimes I take a break. Sometimes I read. Sometimes I ask other people for help. Sometimes I just do something totally unrelated that makes me happy, that makes me excited. Like go eat some ice cream or go do something that's the opposite of writing. So if I'm really frustrated writing, I try to think about what I'm doing. Is I'm sitting in one place, stationary, looking at a piece of paper, not moving. So sometimes I think I should move. So I'll go for a run or a bike ride, or I'll go skateboarding. I try to get out of that world as much as possible so that when I come back to it, I'm feeling refreshed. Another thing that I want to say is that frustration is a part of the process. These books of mine that I've written and made, these books are not frustration free. Just because you become an author and you've published books, it doesn't mean that it gets easy to write. It doesn't mean that it's suddenly easy to publish books. It takes me the same amount of effort and intensity, and I face the same challenges when writing books now than I did, 10 years ago when I first really started writing books, even longer ago. So frustration is a part of it. Anything that you care about and that you love and that you put a lot of time into is going to be full of all sorts of emotions. So writing these books, I faced plenty of frustration and doubt and difficulty and challenges, but I love doing this. I also, at the same time, there are times when I have so much fun, when I'm so interested and curious and excited and delighted. And there's more of that than there is frustration. And the other thing about frustration is that I love doing this so much that when I face a challenge, when I meet a difficulty, when I encounter an obstacle, even if it's tough and frustrating and difficult and annoying, I know that if I push through and figure out how to get through it, I will be better at this thing that I love doing. So when it took me 5 hours to figure out how to draw a vacuum cleaner, most of that 5 hours was frustration and challenge and difficulty. But I knew that if I pushed through and reached my goal, I would be happy and I would be, at the end of the day, a better drawer than I was when I started. And so that's what keeps me going. The faith that I know I'll get through this and I'll be better. So I don't want to tell you that there's one thing to do to get rid of frustration or that you'll never be frustrated. Anything worth doing is going to be full of all sorts of different emotions, good, bad, and in between. So when you do face frustration, find ways to come up with it, to get around it and to make it easier to barrel through, whether it's taking a break, asking for help, reading a book and getting inspiration, or doing something else that you love, just getting out energy somewhere else. Maybe you want to jump on a trampoline or go for a bike ride or dance or sing or play an instrument. Do something else that you love to do, and it will make you fresh when you get back to the page.
Thank you.
Yeah, I hope that's helpful. Yeah, these were great questions you guys had, and there was a lot of great work that I saw that you guys were doing. Thank you for joining me and hanging out. This was a lot of fun. I'm glad to get to do this. I usually do this constantly throughout the year, in person and virtually, and I haven't got a chance to as much in the recent months. So this was really great.
Yeah, this was awesome. Thank you so much for being here. I love for one thing, you can draw upside down so well. It's a real skill.
Yeah,
like writing.
I've had to do a lot of it.
Yeah.
I've gotten pretty good.
Yeah, well done. And some great advice there about how frustration is part of the process. And I love that Miles Davis piece. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah. Thank you guys for inviting me out. I hope to be back in Aurora in person once it's safe. and I'll reach out to you guys, and I'd love to swing by the library and say hi.
Absolutely. We'd love to have you.
Yeah, so thank you. Stay safe and have a good rest of your summer, and thank you again.